Hey guys, my name's Pocket and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Ezreal. Ezreal has always been a super popular champion in League, and today I'm going to teach you exactly how to play Ezreal ADC. This guide is going to cover everything from the absolute basics all the way up to some niche tips and tricks that are really going to help you master him. As usual, I'll put timestamps in the video description, and once again this guide was voted on by you guys over in the community tab on the channel page. So if you want to be able to vote for upcoming guides, then hit subscribe, head over to the community tab, and see what we've got coming up next. So we're going to start off by talking about Ezreal's abilities, just so you know exactly what you're dealing with and exactly what your capabilities are when you play Ezreal. Firstly, Ezreal's passive is a stacking passive. Every time his abilities hit, this could be against minions, monsters, champions, it doesn't matter. Every time they hit, they generate a stack, which gives you 10% bonus attack speed. This can stack up to 50% bonus attack speed at 5 stacks, and they last for 6 seconds. If you manage to land another ability, it will refresh this duration, so it's possible to keep yourself max stacked for an extended period of time. Ezreal's Q fires a bolt of energy in the target direction. It deals physical damage to the first enemy that it hits. This can include minions, monsters, or champions, and it will apply on-hit and on-attack effects at 100% effectiveness. Also, when Mystic Shot hits an enemy, and again, it doesn't matter whether it's a champion or a minion, the cooldowns of all of Ezreal's abilities are reduced by 1.5 seconds. This includes the cooldown of your Q itself. Once again, we're going to talk about the passive of this ability in more depth later on, but for now, just keep it in mind. Ezreal's W fires a ring of energy in the target direction, and this ring will stick to champions, structures, and epic monsters. This means that it won't stick to minions, normal jungle monsters, or even large monsters like red and blue buff, but it will stick to Rift Herald, Baron, Drake, champions, towers, and inhibitors. When the ring is on, it will mark the target for 4 seconds, and Ezreal's next damaging ability or auto attack within those 4 seconds will detonate the ring and deal a bonus magic damage hit that scales with AD and AP. Also, if Ezreal manages to detonate this with an ability instead of an auto attack, he will not only restore the mana cost of the W, but also get an extra 60 mana back. This means that if you manage to hit a W and then a Q, you actually end up with more mana than you started with. Ezreal's E is his main mobility ability. After a short cast time, he will blink in the target direction. When he lands, he will fire a bolt at the nearest enemy. This can be minions, monsters, champions. It will simply fire at whichever one is nearest to you when you land. It will, however, prioritize enemies that have been struck by your W. So if they have that ring on them when you E near them, even if there's another enemy closer to you, it's still going to go to that person that has the ring on them, assuming they're in range. Also, this ability doesn't necessarily require you to have vision of the enemy that it hits. So if you manage to get your W onto somebody and they go into a bush, you can use your E to run them down, even if you lose vision of them. Ezreal's ult fires a wide barrage of energy in the target direction. It has an infinite range, so it will fly across the entire map until it goes all the way outside, and it's going to briefly grant you vision of the area that it travels through. If it hits an enemy, it will deal magic damage, which scales with AD and AP, but it's important to note that it does 50% damage to minions and non-epic monsters. What you need to note here is that this is hindering your ability to wave clear because of the reduced damage to minions, but that the reduced damage to monsters only applies to non-epic monsters. So it's not hindering your ability to get that awesome Ezreal ult steal of Baron or Drake. So just keep this in mind. If you do decide to wave clear, understand that it is going to be doing reduced damage, but this doesn't carry over to main objectives. In this section, we're going to talk about Ezreal's rune sets. Right now, I think there's only one rune set that you should be taking on Ezreal, but I'm going to run you through exactly why you should be building each rune so that you're going to understand exactly how to get the most out of Ezreal and exactly what these runes are bringing to the table. So to start off, for our keystone, we're always going to select Conqueror. Conqueror is a great keystone for Ezreal. It's a stacking rune that stacks every time you hit enemy champions with abilities or auto attacks. Now, for ranged auto attacks, you only get 1 stack, but for abilities and melee auto attacks, you get 2 stacks. These stacks grant flat AP or AD bonuses, and once fully stacked, you'll heal for some of your damage dealt. Now, this is, on the face of it, very good for Ezreal. He has great AD scalings, so the stacking AD from this rune is going to give you quite a lot. But the thing that makes it really good on Ezreal is that he's not as handicapped as other ranged champions by the fact that ranged auto attacks stack slower. Abilities still give 2 stacks and the really short cooldown on Ezreal's Q, along with the fact that your W, E, and ult are pretty easy to hit, fully stacking Conqueror a total breeze on Ezreal. Obviously, after we've selected Conqueror, we're going to have access to the precision tree, and on line 1, we're always going to take Presence of Mind. Presence of Mind is a fantastic rune on Ezreal. It gives you mana regen whenever you hit an enemy champion for a short period of time, and Ezreal's nice ability to poke enemies even when he's the ADC means that he can keep this Presence of Mind buff up, allowing him to continue to use his very low mana cost Qs. You might be using these Qs for CS or just to poke further, but either way, Presence of Mind is giving you some really good sustain that's synergizing super well with your laning phase playstyle, so it's a must-take rune. Then on line 2, we're going to take Legend Bloodline. Legend Bloodline is a stacking rune that gives you some lifesteal as the game goes on. In my opinion, this is the best option for Ezreal. You don't really need tenacity because you're a slippery little ADC to say the least, and while of course you do need to be using auto attacks on ADC Ezreal, something we're definitely going to touch on later on, Bloodline is more powerful than Alacrity later on in the game, and because you're not entirely auto attack focused, I think this is accentuated on Ezreal, and I always feel better when I have that Bloodline rather than that Alacrity. And then finally, we've got a choice between Coup de Grace and Cut Down. This choice depends entirely on the enemy team. If the enemy has a lot of high HP champions or tanky champions, then Cut Down is definitely going to be the best rune because it gives you more damage depending on how much more health they have than you. But if they have a squishier team, especially if they have a very squishy bot lane team, then you're going to want to take Coup de Grace. Coup de Grace does extra damage to champions based on how much missing health they have, so it's better into squishier targets, but it can also be really nice when you're trying to pick somebody off with your ult. Let's say they got out of a fight with very low HP and you think you know where they're recalling. This is going to give you just that little bit extra damage on those low HP stragglers. And then for our secondary runes, we're going to go into the inspiration tree. In this tree, we're going to select Biscuit Delivery. Biscuit Delivery is obviously great for sustain because you get these biscuits at 2, 4, and 6 minutes, and they help regen your health and your mana when you eat them. But an often overlooked aspect of these biscuits is that each time that you eat one or sell one, you're going to get 50 bonus maximum mana. This means that this rune is effectively a very easy 150 bonus maximum mana past 6 minutes into the game. Not only is this nice for sustain, but as we're going to talk about in the build section, Ezreal does scale a little bit with maximum mana, so that's an added benefit of this rune. And then finally, we're going to take Cosmic Insight. Cosmic Insight is a great rune for an ADC in general. It's offering you a massive 18 summoner spell haste, so that your flash and your heal are just up more often. This can be really nice if you're forcing a fight, knowing that your summoner spells have just come back and that the enemies won't be back yet if you've had a fight where you've burnt all of your summoner spells earlier on. So it's super nice to have on bot lane in general, but the added benefit of Cosmic Insight with Ezreal is that it also gives you 10 item haste. Now obviously this is tied in with Ezreal's builds, so we'll talk a bit more about it in the next section, but one of Ezreal's core items is Sheen, building it into Essence Reaver, and the item haste from Cosmic Insight does affect the passive internal cooldown of these items, effectively giving you more damage. And then finally for the rune shards, we're going to take Attack Speed, Adaptive Force, and Armor. This is something that you should take every single game. The attack speed rune shard starts up immediately. It's not a scaling rune shard, so it helps you with early CSing before you build enough damage to easily CS on Ezreal. Adaptive Force is obviously nice because, like we said, we have great AD scalings on Ezreal. And then we take Armor simply because that's typically where most of the damage is coming from on bot lane. Obviously, if they have an APC, you can take Magic Resist. Finally, I want to take a little bit of a timeout to talk about a secondary rune set on Ezreal, in which people go into the sorcery tree, they take Mana Flow Band and Transcendence. This is a perfectly reasonable secondary rune set on Ezreal. Mana Flow Band does give you more maximum mana than Biscuit Delivery, and arguably better mana sustain because it does stack quickly on Ezreal. And then obviously Transcendence is giving you a good amount of extra ability haste and ability usage, which definitely does outshine combine that item haste and Sheen synergy, but personally I think that Cosmic Insight and those extra summoner spell usages are much more powerful. If you are in very low elos, I'm talking iron, bronze, maybe silver, then you can look towards this sorcery tree with Mana Flow Band and Transcendence instead of the inspiration tree. But once you start to move into higher elos, even the average elos like high silver and gold, at this point you should be able to coordinate usage of your summoner spells and track the enemy summoner spells. And also, especially when you're moving into plat and then into diamond, safety and denying the enemy kill gold by having those extra summoner spells and just simply being safer becomes more important, because they're not going to throw their leads away as easily and they're going to do more with that kill gold if they manage to lock you down. So being much more safe with more flash usage and more heal usage, especially if you're using it to save a support, can be extremely valuable. Yes, you are less powerful, but if you're not feeding the enemy as much, then you are more powerful in comparison. At the end of the day, this does come down to a little bit of preference, but I would suggest no matter what elo you're in, that you look towards this inspiration tree with Biscuit Delivery and Cosmic Insight instead of going into the sorcery tree. And next, we're going to talk about Ezreal's builds. Ezreal's builds are actually pretty static at the moment. You're going to want to go down the exact same build path, with choices only popping up in the last couple of items. But in this section, I'm going to explain exactly what you should build and why you should build it, and then of course go in depth into what choices you can make and how you can get the most out of the items that you are buying. So to start off, we're going to take a Doran's Blade and a health potion. Now, sneak peek at what's coming up next, we are going to build Mura Mana, and of course that starts off with the now starter item Tear of the Goddess, but frankly I think that the extra CS ability from your Doran's Blade, as well as the fact that it gives you a little bit of health sustain as well, makes it a much better starting item than Tear. Also, Ezreal stacks Tear extremely easily because of the low cooldown and low mana cost of your Q. Every time you use your Q to CS or to poke, you're obviously going to stack that Tear, meaning that you don't need to get it early on in order to fully stack that Mura Mana pretty much as soon as you're completing the item. After that, I like to go into Sheen. Sheen is a fantastic item on Ezreal. After using an ability, your next basic attack on hit is going to do a significant amount of bonus damage. Now, as we talked about in the abilities section, your Q is an on-hit ability. By that I mean it applies on-hit effects when it hits an enemy champion, minion, or monster. So one single use of your Q will proc this. As you fire it, it will start up the Sheen effect because you have used an ability, and then when it hits, it will apply the on-hit effect and deal the bonus damage. This gives all of your Qs in lane a little bit more oomph. It will help you CS easier if you're having to play safely, and it will help you poke a lot more if you're playing aggressively. After Sheen, then we're going to buy our Tear of the Goddess, and at this point I also like to pick up my boots. As I have talked about in a couple of the sections, Ezreal is a slippery champion. Having that extra movement speed and playing around being very safe because of your mobility as an ADC is a great way to kind of stay ahead of the game in laning phase and make the most out of the fact that you can CS easily, CS safely, and be quite autonomous if your support is roaming or simply just a little bad. You're going to want to take Ionian Boots of Lucidity as your core boots. You can look towards defensive options if the enemy is full AD or full AP, but the core boot choice is going to be the cooldown boots. They offer you 20 ability haste as well as 12 summoner spell haste. Obviously, Ezreal uses a lot of abilities, so ability haste is really nice. Summoner spell haste is nice for the exact same reasons that I suggested you take Cosmic Insight in the rune section, and the boots are very cheap at just 950 gold, along with the fact that our next items are going to also be relatively cheap. It's allowing you to hit your power spikes just that little bit earlier and get ahead. After this, we're going to finish our Sheen into the full Essence Reaver item. Essence Reaver is a great item on Ezreal. It gives you 45 attack damage, which is pretty nice, as well as 20 ability haste, which of course is really nice because of your E, W, and Q being staples of your kit. It also upgrades that bonus damage from the Sheen Spellblade effect from 100% base AD to 100% base AD plus 40% bonus AD, and each time that you proc this, you're going to get some mana back as well. Overall, this just makes it a great item to get early on, gives you lots of mana sustain, lane, it gives you lots of poke, and it's relatively cheap at just 2,800 gold. Add that to the fact that you've bought relatively cheap boots in the Ionian Boots of Lucidity, it means you can hit a pretty early power spike, which is really nice. Then after that, we're going to finish our tier into Manamune, which hopefully is going to be turned into Muramana either as soon as we've finished because we've stacked the tier fully, or pretty shortly after. Muramana is a fantastic item on Ezreal. This is the item that we talked about in the runes section that scales with your bonus maximum mana, granting you bonus AD equal to 2.5% of your maximum mana, and it gives you basic attack on hit damage against champions only of 1.5% maximum mana. Also, damaging abilities against champions deal 2.7% maximum mana, plus 6% of your AD, and basically while this seems pretty complicated, it tends to drive itself, and it all comes together to give you a lot of extra damage. Alongside Essence Reaver, your Qs are going to hit really hard. You should have no mana problems, and you're just going to be able to continue to use your abilities, either just poking with your Q or full ability rotations at will. Now, some of you may have noticed that we haven't actually yet built a mythic item, and that's because there aren't any actually really great mythic items on Ezreal. The mythic items that contain Spellblade do not stack with Essence Reaver's Sheen Spellblade effect, so there's no point building them, and Essence Reaver is still the best one to build on Ezreal right now. So for that reason, we're just going to go into a full damage item, and in my opinion, you should be going for Duskblade of Drakthar. Duskblade is a great damage item. It offers you a full 60 attack damage, as well as 20 ability haste, and then 18 lethality. Lethality is obviously really nice because all of this extra on-hit damage is actually physical damage on Ezreal, and lethality is effectively scaling armor penetration. Duskblade also has yet another on-hit effect. Basic attacking an enemy champion deals 65 plus 25% bonus AD as physical damage on hit. At this point, I hope you're seeing a pattern that on-hit damage on Ezreal is really nice because of the way that he can proc it with his Q very easily. And then Duskblade's mythic passive also gives you more ability haste, 5 ability haste for every legendary item that you've built. So at this point, as soon as you build Duskblade, you're going to get another 10, meaning that this item on its own is giving you 30 ability haste. And for this reason, and because of the way that these items synergize together and add to each other's effects really nicely, I am always going to build these 3 items in this order every single game. This means that including boots, we're going to have 4 items, and for our last 2 items, we're going to have our choices. Now, the first thing that I'm always thinking about is, do I need anti-heals? Healing can be pretty oppressive, especially on bot lane with the current state of League. If they have enchanters or champions with oppressive self-sustain, like Aatrox or Mundo, to name just a couple of many, then you should definitely be looking towards Chempunk Chainsword. This is definitely the best item for Ezreal in terms of anti-heals. It's much better than Mortal Reminder because it has a passive that deals bonus 60% anti-heals instead of the average 40 on champions below 50% HP, unlike Mortal Reminder that requires 3 basic attacks in very short succession to proc this bonus anti-heals. It's also going to offer you 15 ability haste and 45 attack damage instead of Mortal Reminder's 25 attack damage and then movement speed, attack speed, and critical strike rather than ability haste. Now, after you've built this, or if you don't need anti-heals at all and you decide to forego it, the next choice is going to be between Guardian Angel and Cyrilda's Grudge. Guardian Angel is a great item into full AD team comps. It's not as much extra damage as Cyrilda's Grudge, but taking your damage down a little bit to give you a lot more safety from the enemy is 100% worthwhile. So if they do have a lot of physical damage on the enemy team, definitely look towards Guardian Angel. The other scenario that makes this item awesome is if they have an assassin, somebody that's managing to jump on top of you even though you're Ezreal and just take you out of the game, because this item has a passive that revives you to 50% HP after you die. It does have a very long cooldown, of course, so it's probably only going to happen once in a team fight, but it can be just enough to bring you back into the game and let you do a significant amount of extra work for your team. If, however, you don't feel like you need this revive, let's say you are doing very well, the enemy are not able to get onto you and they're not killing you that much, and they're not heavily sided towards physical damage, then we can look towards Serylda's Grudge. This is an armor penetration item, which obviously makes it exceptional into very tanky team comps, because it is a percentage armor penetration item rather than a flat lethality item like Duskblade. It's only really very good into an enemy team that has bought a lot of armor. So in this case, look at the enemy team, analyze their items. If they have a lot of armor, whether it's spread out or it's just on problem champions, you definitely want to pick up Serylda's Grudge. At this point in time, you are probably completely full up on items, but if you've decided to forgo anti-heals, as well as either Serylda's or Guardian Angel, and you do have an extra slot left for your final item, you should look towards Ravenous Hydra. Ravenous Hydra is not the most optimal item on Ezreal, but it does give you some extra on-hit damage, and it also provides you with some wave clear because that on-hit effect is AoE. This can be nice later on when you have to forcefully clear waves as quickly as possible, or also just in team fights because that AoE damage is going to be damaging a lot more people. The effect has a great AD scaling, and on top of all of this, it offers you 10% Omnivamp, which can just help with sustain in the very, very late game. Like I said though, this is a very niche item when you've just decided that you don't need anti-heals and you don't need GA, and I'm finding it rarer and rarer for me to want this item, but it's definitely something that you should consider. In this final section, we're going to talk about a few tips and tricks on Ezreal that you absolutely have to know before you get into playing him. So the first thing that I want to talk about is how Ezreal's E, Q, and R work. Now these abilities are targeted at a location, and they have an uninterruptible channel time. What this means is that once you start the ability, it will be channeled over a certain period of time before the actual ability finally goes through. It's easiest to see how this works with Ezreal's Q and Flash. You can press the Q on Ezreal, and you will see a small bar flash up. Now in-game, this is going to be so quick that you can't really see it, but if we slow down some footage here, you're going to see that it will load slowly towards the end of the bar, and that your Q will not actually be fired until it hits the end of the bar and the cast time is officially over. During this cast time, even if you do something like Flash, you will not interrupt the actual cast, but because Flash is instantaneous, it means that the Q will be fired from the new location, even though you actually cast the ability in the initial location. Now, this specific effect has some pretty important connotations for Ezreal, so let's talk about them. Number one is what I've pretty much just showed you. You can extend the distance on your Q by flashing and then using Q. But if you use Q and then flash, you're going to extend that distance just as much, but you will give the enemy much less time to react, because effectively, if you manage to flash right at the end of the channel time of your Q will be almost instantaneously fired as if it had no channel time as soon as you appear from your flash, reducing the enemy's ability to dodge this skill shot, whilst also greatly extending the range. Can be a really nice way to pick off a straggling enemy after a team fight, allowing you to really make the most of that one fight by getting as many objectives uncontested. Similarly, you can use this with your E. Because the flash comes out first, you actually end your E at the final location, meaning that's where the projectile is fired from and that's where the projectile range will be calculated from. This makes it much better than if you used E and then flash, of course. And because you're interrupting that channel time, it makes it much quicker and it gives the enemy much less time to react than if you were to simply flash and then E. These are pretty niche tips and tricks. It's probably not going to be the deciding factor of your game, but they're definitely something that can be super helpful. If you are in a position where you want to burn flash to try and kill somebody, it's probably pretty important that you get them dead, so giving yourself every advantage is really important. This interaction is also connected to how Ezreal can seem to escape hooks like Blitzcrank, because the hook tries to interrupt the channel on Ezreal's E. Of course, this only works if you start channeling your E before the hook hits you, and you'll appear to just simply jump out of CC. This is obviously harder to time because it's much more reliant on when the enemy decides to try and hook you, but it's something to take note of and just to understand that your E is capable of getting you out of some pretty sticky situations, because bar a few little exceptions, once you cast your E, you are going to dash in that direction, even if you get grabbed. Next, let's talk about combos on Ezreal. But actually, instead of talking about static one-shot combos, I'm going to try and focus more on rotation rotations. Ezreal is, after all, an ADC. He's not really a burst damage champion. You definitely have the ability to burst people down, but it's different to, say, playing a Lee Sin or a Zed, where sometimes you're going to be able to pull off specific combos for maximum damage. Instead, I want to talk about specific rotations and some core considerations that you should keep in mind when you're trying to build a DPS rotation on Ezreal. And the first thing that I want to talk about is when to use your Q when you start a rotation. Very often I see people throw out their W and then their Q. It's a really nice little trick. The W goes in and the Q hits it almost immediately, and you seem to get a really fat damage. And in laning phase, when you're only using this for poke, it can be really nice. However, I like to try and pop my W with my E and then throw out my Q. The reasons for this are twofold. Firstly, by giving yourself the ability to reposition with your E, you can put yourself in a better position to hit your Q. Hitting more Qs is more damage, and that's just really nice. Also, because as we talked about in the ability section, every time Ezreal hits a Q, he does get some cooldown refunded for all of his other abilities. Using your Q after your W and your E means that you're more quickly going to have your W and E ready again because they'll get some cooldown refunded. This can be extremely important, especially considering how long the cooldown is on Ezreal's E. If you do use your W and then your Q and then you decide to E into them, not only are you using your E later, so you're starting that cooldown later, but you're going to get less Qs off before that E comes back, meaning the overall cooldown will be longer. A similar thing that I want to talk about in this section is don't be afraid to use your ult very early on or even to initiate teamfights. Your ult is an AoE ability, meaning that it can stack your attack speed passive very nicely in teamfights. Hopefully it's going to hit at least a couple of people, maybe even the entire enemy team depending on how the teamfight is going, and that means that when you then start to engage with your abilities and, more importantly, your auto attacks, you're going to have that increased attack speed, which simply means more damage. This is really important, and it leads on to our next tip, which is don't forget Ezreal has auto attacks. I know, some of you are going to think, why are you telling me this? Of course Ezreal has auto attacks, he's an ADC. But it is something that I see people missing out on a significant amount on Ezreal. They play him as if he's a spellcaster or a mage, focusing entirely on hitting Qs and getting WEQ combos. And that is a big part of Ezreal's damage, and that is a big part of playing him. But remember, you've built a lot of on-hit damage, you have an attack speed stacking passive, and you've built a ton of AD too. You've even built a little crit chance with Essence Reaver. So definitely don't forget to try and get as many auto attacks in as possible. You are not useless when your E, W, and Q are on cooldown. You can still do a significant amount of damage with your autos, and you have to capitalize on this. The next thing I want to talk about is somewhat connected to the advice I gave you to try and pop your W with your E instead of your Q. This is something that I will see people doing in lane a lot. They hit that W, but the enemy is in a minion wave, so they decide to hit it with their E, and they just dash straight into the middle of the enemy minion wave, right on top of the ADC that they've hit with their W. And of course, because the E auto targets the W targeted ally, you'll pop that W and do a lot of damage. However, you've now just put yourself inside a minion wave, and if you start attacking the enemy, they're going to start attacking you, and you've also just put yourself inside auto attack range of the enemy ADC. So the advice that I can give you here is don't underestimate how far the range of Ezreal's E is. I don't mean the range that you can jump, I mean the range of the auto-targeting projectile that you fire when you land. It will fire a lot further than you think, so don't just go dashing straight into the enemy ADC. Try to dash as far away from them as possible. You can still proc the W and maybe even hit your Q as well, because that's pretty high range, but you can do it all while staying so far away that they can't trade with you. This is a really important aspect of laning on Ezreal, giving them the least amount of opportunity to damage you while dealing as much damage to them as you can. Yes, if you dive straight into them, you'll also be able to hit auto attacks, but by foregoing your auto attacks to stop them doing any auto attacks to you, and potentially hitting a full WEQ combo, you're going to have a significantly favorable trade to you. This is something that you need to get used to, but it's really not that difficult, so hop in the practice tool and just mess around with how far Ezreal's E can actually fire, and when you are using it in lane, really do think about where you're positioning yourself? Are you putting yourself in a position where you'll be able to hit your Q afterwards? Are you putting yourself in a position where you'll be safe from enemy trading? This could be trading from the enemy ADC, or putting yourself in danger from the enemy support. Just keep all of these things in mind and try to hit these optimal E's that give you the most damage for the least damage returning. And then the final thing that I want to talk about on Ezreal is actually connected to this exact combo, and that is when you use your W and then you use your E to pop that W, your E will face you as Ezreal towards the target that it is hit with its projectile. And of course that target will be the person to which you applied your W. The important part about the fact that you will be facing them is that if you have used your E with your mouse cursor within range of where your E is going to land, then your mouse cursor will be directly above your character model. Therefore, if you immediately press Q with your cursor exactly on where you are, the game needs to make a choice of where to fire your Q, because it's technically not being told to fire it in any direction. That means that it fires it in the direction to which you're facing. Therefore, if you use your Q, as soon as you arcane shift, it will always fire exactly in the direction of the person that your W is on. This allows you to hit really clean, really easy full ability trades. You land your W on an enemy champion, you then E to a location, being careful to put your cursor within the maximum range of your E jump, and then simply press Q straight away. It sounds a little dicey and it does take some practice, so once again, hop in the practice tool and get to grips with it, but this is a great way to hit more Qs and do more damage. And we're done. Thank you very much for watching. I really hope this has been helpful for you. If it was, leave a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And if you've got any questions whatsoever, leave a comment and I'll try and get back to everybody.